All righty, it's the election of 1860, right? Every election is the most important in history. 1860 is pretty important. All right, first of all, it's a five-way race. The new Republican Party, they're going to nominate Abraham Lincoln of Illinois. The Democrats have Stephen Douglas, also from Illinois. The Southern Democrats, yes, as a new branch of that party, has John Breckinridge there of Kentucky. The Constitutional Party out of Tennessee is John Bell, and the Liberty Party, Garrett Smith from New York. Well, you know what the number one issue is? It's going to be slavery, right? The Liberty Party wants to get rid of it now. The Constitutional Party is willing to leave it up to the states. The Southern Democrats are going to defend it. The Democratic Party is trying to avoid the issue altogether. And Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party are willing to compromise. And the main compromise is to keep slavery where it is now. Don't let it expand. Hopefully it dies out. Well, they have the election. Now, usually the guy who wins 40% of the votes, the guy who loses, right? But when you have so many people running, it's very hard to get over that 50% mark. Once you get over 50%, it's pretty, definitive. You've won. Nobody can dispute it, right? Anyway, Douglas going to get about 30%. We got Breckinridge with about 18. John Bell, we'll call it 13. So Lincoln gets 40% of the vote, which, he wins most of the electoral votes, but that 40% vote thing is just not definitive enough, and a lot of people, they just don't see it as legitimate. Now, a lot of the southern states didn't even put him on the ballot. So, not that he had a chance of winning down there anyway, but it already tells you what they're thinking. They don't like Lincoln, they don't trust Lincoln. And now that he's declared a winner with 40% of the vote, he's just looking more and more illegitimate in their eyes. So South Carolina, they have their own vote on December the 20th, 1860, and they declare that the Union is dissolved. South Carolina has left the Union. Andrew Jackson is not there to smack him around. We got Abe Lincoln, who is trying to avoid a civil war. Does there really have to be a war? Did it have to go this far? We've seen all the missteps along the way, right? We saw the Fugitive Slave Act as part of the Compromise of 1850. We saw the fighting that broke loose in Kansas. We see the Southern refusal to even put Abraham Lincoln on the ballot. All right? So some people argue that these were missteps along the way that led to the Civil War. Let's not forget the Dred Scott decision. All right? And other people have argued that it was kind of inevitable because it's really a war between two separate nations. The country is very big. The North is industrialized. The South is agricultural. There isn't a lot of contact because it's 1860. I mean, most people don't leave, within 20 miles of their home. So the whole thing is just extremely different. It might have been inevitable. This debate has been going on ever since the Civil War began. On March the 4th, 1861, Lincoln is inaugurated. Buchanan tried a last-second compromise with the South and hands it off to Lincoln. Lincoln is willing to leave slavery alone where it currently exists by limiting it, but like I said, the South isn't going for it. So the first state to leave is South Carolina. The next one is going to be Mississippi, followed by Florida, Alabama, Georgia. Louisiana and Texas take a break. We'll talk about it after Christmas. So this is where the whole see after the holidays thing starts, right? So in January and February, Louisiana secedes from the Union. Texas, who was once seceded from Mexico, now secedes from the United States of America. Now these states up here, the border states in the upper South, they're just kind of watching to see what happens. Delaware actually decides to get rid of it on its own. State action, they outlaw slavery in Delaware, and they announce that they're going to stay with the Union regardless of what happens. Now, there are some Union forts around still in the South. In Texas, they fall without a fight. They just walk in, declare Confederate. The U.S. soldiers, they just pack up and leave. Fort Pickens down in Florida remains in Union hands. It's too isolated for anyone to take a shot at. But the one that everyone starts focusing on is Fort Sumter, right there in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. It sits out there. It's not bothering anybody. But a lot of Confederates and Southern nationalists are very upset. They don't want to see a foreign outpost, Union outpost, sitting in the middle of their territory. So this becomes a problem already. Meanwhile, they have formed the Confederate States of America. The provisional government was in Montgomery. They later move it up to Richmond. And their first president will be Jefferson Davis. So they create a constitution that looks a lot like the United States, except it defends slavery, and secession is illegal from the Confederate States of America, which is kind of ironic considering how the country was born. Now, they decide they don't want Fort Sumter there. They demand they leave. They put their own general there of the South Carolina militia, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, is going to open fire on Fort Sumter, held by his former artillery teacher from West Point, Major Robert Anderson. So they opened fire on it. 24 hours of heavy, bloodless bombardment, and they finally decide to surrender. They let the Union soldiers go, and this changes everything. Because a lot of people in the North weren't really sure if they wanted to have a civil war. Some people said if the South wants to leave the Union, fine, goodbye and good riddance, don't need it anymore. But when you open fire on the American flag, that changes everything. And now the rest of the states who are on the fence about leaving start to go. Arkansas is gone. Tennessee's gone. Virginia leaves, and then North Carolina. And the minute Virginia leaves, the western part of Virginia secedes from Virginia and immediately becomes the state of West Virginia. Of course, the Confederacy says you can't do that, and they say we just did, and by the way, you just left too. So, they got that. Kentucky's a border state. The sentiment there is mixed, going back and forth between Union and Confederate, pro-slavery, anti-slavery. Missouri, same thing, same sort of problem. Could be a lot of Confederate sympathizers, a lot of Union sympathizers. They had their own civil war within a civil war going on. They sent about 100,000 U.S. troops to make sure it didn't join the Confederacy. And of course, Maryland in the east around D.C., lots of Confederate sympathizers. Ironic, around D.C., the west side, very much pro-Union. We sent a bunch of Union soldiers there just to make sure it doesn't try to secede. So the battle lines for the Civil War are drawn. It's going to be long. It's going to be bloody. The USA is never going to be the same when this is done. 620,000 Americans are going to die. All right, on that cheery note, we go into the Civil War. Have a nice day, or try to anyway.